I'm going to start with a poem called Paver, which is one of a series of poems connected by the fact that they were all to do with building extensions that we had done. And the particular reference for this poem is the difference between this man and the rest of the gang. It's called Paver. His soft voice, soft hands and softer eyes, sky blue smiling, make Dave something of a misfit in this building trade designed to reap fast bucks and bugger customers up. Decades away, he'd have been farm labourer, herding cattle and sheep, tending hens and geese in some hillside village nestled just under the hill ridge, with the ring of moorlands to all horizons, the network of dry stone walling and wider skies, lit in brilliant sunlight or drowned in cloud and mist. You can see his affinity with stone in the way he handles these sets, caressing their faceted shapes, scoffing off earth dirt, dressing edges with his chipping chisel, turning them like precious bowls in his hands and placing them delicately but firmly, just there and there, with all the skill of a man of the land, inherited rather than learned. Ribbed for being daft bastard, slow, a lazy git, his is steady, patient work, taking days till the driveway is paved, a quiet, dignified job done by a gentle man, soft of tongue and thankful for lack of rain. The next poem sort of celebrates the nature of stone, but albeit rambling through the Peak District, but being reminded of different political events happening far away in Bosnia. And the important point of the poem is the concluding stanza. Rambling the Peak District and finding ourselves in Bosnia. Fallen stone walling springing to attention in the militia of Srebrenica's coffin-lid headstones. So many mounds, graves, names, so much stone. Hushed cabalas of foxgloves behind walls and in gateways, the huddled mothers of Banja Luka living out numbness and grief at street corners. Sad-eyed rams outstaring our trespass with all the incomprehension of Sarajevo butchers juggling bloody guts through slipping fingers. Red-dyed sheephead, blood flash against grass, the shorn flanks thinned to iridescent skins like bloodletting limbs in Mostar's bazaars. This copse is makeshift mosque, where larks call from sky's tall tower with plain song, ancient and eastern, while high on the hill ridges there crackles the ack of magpies kalashnikoving at raiding neighbours. Not homes, but buildings gutted and shattered, windows gone missing, roofs hanging in air, rooms outside in, and doors spanning space in wreck of brick, bone of stone, the folks vanished away, fields being idle, abandoned, tractors and rusting ploughshares, the land surrendered to nettle, ambushed by weed, strafing rain, and wind's ricochet. So much spoil in brambles, barbing ditches and trench. In the graveyard stillnesses, the seed in the ground, old soil is growing new owners. Consider then, this country too has bridges to build. I'm quite interested in foreign travel, and this next poem is set in Neubourg in Normandy in France. And the particular focus of the poem is the fact that French people like to buy their food fresh. So it deals with animals kept specifically to be bought live, to be later cooked. Gay Market, Neuburg, Normandy. Faces like gargoyles from the church behind, French farmers are tied to history. I claim true 20th century anonymity. Ghosting their futures, 8 white turkeys shiver in a cage. The amber rabbit seems sad. Quail, goose and dove have surrendered their pride to trade. 12 lemon ducklings rumble in a box. You'll be excused for thinking their silence complicity, though fear in their eyes reveals it's an asylum game. Town wives haggle the price of hens packed too deep in crates with all the crush, squeeze and hunched alarm of Buchenwald. Their sauntering husbands hold upended cockerels, tied at feet, wings a flurry like let-down brollies, later to hang headless in barns, dripping their quilled skins dry. I come for sights and photographs, the French for food or need. Or is it greed? It is straw they leave behind and feathers, from dandy fowl and guinea hens more ordered in their symmetry than the rattlings of cash. I leave not entirely empty-handed, but trophy home this poem. Feast handsomely on this. If I move from France right immediately to home, home ground is a celebration of my locality, the Staffordshire moorlands. And this particular poem called Red Admirals is about one of the wonders of our garden, obviously a butterfly. Red Admirals. Pulsing heartbeats, the isms of being, almost iambic, their blood tick, their wing tick, break flash, or outstaring the day gaze with a vermilion blaze upon black, the colours of poppy. Long tongues seeking the speed of flowers, getting high on it, higher, higher, a drug stumble flight up at the moor's edge with its milk thistles, its knapweed. Is it purple that pulls them? Or gardened with trailing skeins of buddleia, their scattered flashes like girls parading headfuls of hair slides, sudden savagery in our town, a native face mask stabbing from greenness, a pirate slash, a stirring of groin, or the splayers of flowers, caressing petals and stamens, feasting their isness, their futures with a kneading keenness of sex. Closed up are paper wafers of bark or cave triangles of good hope. Many the nets we kids broke and jam jars a day or two jungle with blades of grass and strangled flowers. Even then, amidst cup-handed flutter, that outfacing, outdaring blazon of colour gave us tastes of excitement, the sudden blood bursts of cuts, that pain of amazement. Aging, we add fragilities of life, the nothingnesses of life. Red admirals, captains of ships of youth, harbingers of sad passages of death, God's other toys. Do you want to read now, John?
Depends on the setup.
Well, have you got more to do?
Yes, yeah. Okay. Moving on from Red Admirals, which is located here, I want to read a poem dedicated to a person that influenced me by his example and that I've referred to. This is Martin Booth. In the year 1986, Martin Booth visited the National Park in Zambia to survey for a television documentary a group of upwards of 30 black rhino. When he returned the next year in September with a film crew, he found that the particular group of black rhino had been reduced to perhaps 3. When Martin died in 2004, I thought it suitable for him to have this tribute. It's in this poem, Shooting Rhino. You're aware keratin's the carrot dragging your attention, so it's patience and a steady hand you need, especially when he's doing that wheeling heave, coming in out of focus and in again in his quiet grazing, a delicate swiping of grass, a stumbling, halting stroll that counterpoints his bulk. The trick's lining him up in your sights. That's if you can distinguish him from the crop of rock just under the tree line, that black mass which looks as if it's grazing, head down and rump declining to ground level. So it's sharp binoculars you need, and luck, once you've spotted him, bringing him into focus, full view, centred, so he occupies the total scan, a magnificent pan of a magnificent animal. Black rhino, adult bull, 3 years old. What sheer bulk of hulking flesh. If you were a painter, you'd break him down to planes and plates, make the play of light define his flanks, chart the massy anvil of his head, that almost excuse for an eye so small against the jawline, his pricked up ears and those curving thorns of horn. No wonder horn commands high price. And you need to take his horns, so bring him in, bigger, till you can see his ears' whiskery bristles, his twitching tail, the way the dung has dried on his hide, the spittle dribbling on his slow rolling lips, and the defiant spikes that make him wanted, vulnerable. And you're getting him larger in your sights, till he's practically in your face, has taken hold of your mind, his horns fawning in your head, and you're falling down your sight line, falling into him, but already with that finger itching readiness and clicking once, twice, have him bagged, a gap filled in the family album. My next poem about animal life is a return to insects. My next poem about animal life is a return to insects. This is a sort of extended memory of my relationship with my father when gradually I became his legs, because he, as an invalid, found it very difficult to be mobile. The poem actually sort of celebrates what is later to become a much more environmentally friendly world. Woodlice. Picking up box or moving the props of his bench revealed a little legion, fat soldiers chivied to busy activity, ironclads, mottled battle cray with dust, pivoting to defensive positionings in dizzy blitzkrieg tactics. Armoured in safety, trying surprise by wheeling always, flat-backed tanks, hunting must, they were too small to be antique. Such prehistory demanded size. Dad's keen eyes gleaming at this sudden prize, I saw his black boot, the one built up to make his levelled walk, the one that haunted air, hovered for its place, saw it rise, then glower down, turn on heel, slide its sole, heard the crack of back, the steel squeal. It was massacre. They stood no chance. He triumphed to be shut of bugs. Something dragged my troubled hands. Touching remains, I felt not iron, but skins, lightweight scabs, saw their crease beneaths, pedrail legs unhinged, detached. Sharing their fear of shadow before the blow, I winced. In bed, I'd heard the stairs go creak, imagined the slow shape of that big boot, awaited the rap of his dark stick. I wondered, did they sweat? Ever after, I turned away when he prepared or loudly sang inside to drown the noise. Was I coward? Were they scared? Now, with my son, I let him fondle them, running fat fingers along thin shells, his nails zagging their serrated edge, hands weighing fear in their small scales, curiosity and delight mixed in his eyes, counting legs, teasing feelers, letting them tickle him, a fatter beetle drive, more fun, alive. Then, taking him outside, make them slide to safety. That way, no one's crushed. We all survive. I'm going to move very quickly to, again, a much more local, immediate area of connected with gardening, but this, the connection is with the local man, James Bateman, who was a believer in the second coming, and part of his development at Biddulph was the installation of a geological gallery in which he actually formed the 7 days of the creation. And what Bateman believed was that the divine purpose was explored in ferns and orchids. So he writes, ferns and other flowerless plants came early in the divine program because the coal into which they were ultimately to be converted had a need to be long accumulating for the future comfort and civilization of our race, while the genesis of orchids was postponed until the time drew near when man, who was to be soothed by the gentle influence of their beauty, was about to appear on the scene. So the poem is about the way in which James Bateman has his belief in the eternal confirmed by looking at orchids. Devoted to collecting from aged 8, Bateman spent a fortune, not to mention others' lives, satisfying his desires. So invested days, page grazing plant catalogues, or rolling the globe, locating places, Guatemala, Suriname, to trace the plants inhabiting his passion, till he became entranced by petals as skin-thin as newborn flesh, with its mesh of sky-blue veins barely formed. How he desired those sublimely white, their buds like rows of graded baby toes, their clown sad eyes lighting brightly under full sunshine, or ghosting through slow twilights where he lingered, fingering stems and smelling their must. And how he lusted after the shockingly exotic in jamborees of colour from the Creator's palette, almost frantic in their patternings, so obviously foreign in enviable beyondness they warmed his table talk with the wonders of the Lord. He could sense their tendrils spreading as he strolled past, and their roots, spotty blotched, lifting, spidering out, seeking leverage in the mossy compost, the cradling bark, and believing their leaves to be the panting tongues from the angels of his imagining, was convinced he could hear their breathing. So new, just new, their petal wings angled after him, mouths agape in silent adoration. His, theirs, God's making, God's sport. James Bateman was quite an important, powerful man, and he had strong connections with members of the Royal Horticultural Society, particularly with one Dr. John Lindley, who was the first professor of botany at the University College London. And Lindley was important because he was the person that was given the task by the English government of finding out the reason for the potato blight, which affected Ireland's population very significantly in the period 1848 to 1851. And James Bateman was often in contact with Dr. John Linley. And this poem, which comes from a big sequence about the Irish potato famine, is called The Politics of Husbandry, a footnote. Dr. John Linley, first Professor of Botany at University College London and Secretary of the Royal Horticultural Society, regularly met with its Vice President, James Bateman, concerning the latter's devotion to the orchids, which he cultivated in Knipersley Hall's 14 hothouses, along with the grapes, figs, peaches, nectarines, melons, oranges, lemons, bananas, mangosteens, pineapples, Malayan starfruit, carambolas, granadillas, kumquats and loquats he grew for the delectation of his family and friends. On less congenial days, while Bateman busied himself losing a fortune recreating the world at Biddulph Grange, Linley was appointed by Peel's government to discover the cause of the rot affecting the Irish potato crop, the repeated failure of which was to reduce the population of England's closest to home colony by 25%. Food for thought. Because that contrast between what Bateman was able to grow in his hothouses, 14 hothouses, and the starvation of the Irish population is quite marked and very moving. And I want to actually then move to the location, the reason partly for the writing of this big sequence of poems about the Irish potato famine. And this arises out of a visit to Strokestown Park House in 2004, the stables of which are the location for the Irish National Famine Museum. And it's the contrast, I suppose, between the wealth of this building owned by Anglo-Irish landlords who for much of the time were absent from the place. It's the contrast between that and the sort of poverty that was all around the estate that actually prompts some of my thinking. But more importantly, it was the discovery, the revelation of a whole host of words that I'd never seen before, like Canacre, Cottier, Clachan, Bullying, Spalpeens, and so on. So that sparked my interest, this new vocabulary, but set against the contrast of this magnificent building, which were really only there to house horses. Stable Truths, the Irish National Famine Museum. From outside, this block of Georgian elegance, its broad wooden gates, arch-shaped and spaced at regular intervals in perfect symmetry along the inner face of the brick-built south wing elevation, this celebrates dignity, purpose and proportion, an arranged compactness, somehow reducing scale and making everything manageable. Inside, where sight adjusts to a different light as subtly elusive as dusk, dimensions alter and walls seem taller, wider, broader. What impresses first is their massiness, 7 feet thick. Then next, it's the rhythm of the building, those 11 sections of vaulted ceilings groined like elaborate monastic cloisters or some Romanesque cathedral. Overawed, we double check. Surely this isn't some fantastic joke. All these Tuscan columns, this spread of wealth just to shelter the Mahon team of horses? Exploring deeper, there's more to set us wondering as the stable space gives way to ordered displays with exhibits, pictures, models, maps, plans, cartoons that measure history's relentless tread. Does the selecting act per se compromise objectivity? Can history ever be free from bias? What makes fact no more than that? Just fact, pure and simple. And what of words? What ironies lie behind the use of such prescriptive terms as Kaneka, Kotia, Klakan, Bullying, Spalpeens and Lumper? Does their unfamiliarity excuse our wider ignorance? Can absence of emotion hamper meaning? Or are these just other forms of proportion, serving further purposes by reducing truth to nothing more than a matter of semantics? And do words betray where silences deceive?
I'm just going to read 3 fairly short poems of Roger's, and I'm going to begin with one called Blue Tit. Roger's very good at writing poems about nature, about birds, about animals. This one about the blue tit starts with an epigraph from the Book of British Birds published in 1969, and it reads, "Blue tits have learnt how to get at the milk left on suburban doorsteps by picking at the foil of the bottle tops." And the poem itself is about the blue tit, but it also then goes on to reference Margaret Thatcher, who withdrew free school milk for the over sevens when she was Minister of State for Education in Edward Heath's Conservative government way back in the early 1970s. Little fridge magnet, how you stick at your acrobatics. That swinging confidence in your upside-down world. Your nimble limbering up the scribbled peanut strings in the kingdom of fat balls. And how your insistent busybodying, that fussy hustling in with head-questing beak testing, has earned you my nickname of Maggie's lad after that other milk snatcher. She, too, wore blue. The second poem that I'm going to read is also, in a sense, a political poem because it refers to the coal mining industry of North Staffordshire and one particular colliery, Florence Colliery. But it also refers to David Bowie in passing and the coal miners whose eyes themselves looked like they'd been painted in a Bowie fashion as the coal dust was washed away. And in a way, you can go back to Lawrence's work and it's almost like Sons and Lovers. Nothing has changed in this whole long period, except for the reference, of course, to David Bowie. Trawling photos of David Bowie sporting eyeliner and its neighbour Smith, fresh from finishing his shift at Florence Colliery as, snap tin in hand, he crosses the cobbled yard and clacking the back door latch, looms 4 square in the scullery gloom, his doe eyes almond-shaped by coal dust. And I'm picturing him, stripped to singlet, standing at the slopstone and getting stuck into shaving, his cutthroat rasping skin and sashaying around chin. What a show, so quickly skillful, little finger delicately extended, and never a nick. Once done, turns as he always turns for approval. His cheeks shiny red, and redder against his lashes coal dust mascara. But it is his eye smiles mapped in the shaving glass that conspire an admission of sorts. For sure, knows nothing about AC, DC, except electrics. Knows only where he's going, And that's where he's been since barely a man, like his dad, and his dad's dad before him. Deep beneath, hacking at back-breaking graft, the coal shards indigo into black and splintering under his skin, the dust-clogging hairline, and eye-lining eyes in an innocence that commands no mannered photo-posed rehearsal. But AC/DC smiles working deep for him, underground. And finally, a very different area in the poem that's called For Mike, a friend of Roger's, but it's for Mike and The Day You Came Along. The Day You Came Along was a popular song, recorded first in 1933 and sung by Bing Crosby. And it has an epigraph, I like to sound like a singer. Coleman Hawkins, recording session, February the 22nd, 1965. And I love this epigraph because it refers to jazz, it refers to an album called Swing that Coleman Hawkins made and that was reviewed by Philip Larkin. And it gives that wonderful connection in Roger's poetry to Philip Larkin and back to Hull, because Larkin reviewed jazz for the Daily Telegraph for many a long year, and he loved Coleman Hawkins. So I particularly like this poem. Rehearing Coleman Hawkins 40 years on brings you to mind, and how the style always remained the man. Be suited at work, crisp collar shirted, revelling in linguistic mimicry, and afterwards the 6-pint Friday nighters, whiskey chasers, the after Hull pubs record sessions. That was you, the singer. You, the song. Emotion not inferred but openly played, the synergy of laughter counterpointed by booze, fags and jazz. Oh, and how that tenor sax voiced you with its slap-tonguing reels, its up-tempo vitality, its delicate legato, zest-swinging defiance, the all of you captured in the earnestness of its conversation, cornering your audiences to submission with that angling syntax of conviction, that lexicon of need. And hearing this song again reminds me how in Nairobi, singing another track, its slow rolling rhythm, languorous and sad, you, too soon, died. And if anyone ever wrote a poem as lovingly as that about me, I'd be well satisfied.
That interest in language is at the heart of a poem that features dialect, particularly North Staff dialect. One of the words that I grew up with was the word synatoct, which I think actually means sinew tight and therefore exhausted. Your sinews are that tight you can't work. And for decades I've thought that this was very, very local. It's only quite recently that reading the work of Peter Redding, a very important poet, that I come across a poem called Dog's Tomb, in which are contained the lines, Qui caecus et senectucte confectus, which translates from the Latin into English, who blindness and senility prepared. And I thought it was quite significant that that word senectucte was very similar to senatoct. So it set me thinking. And the odd thing about this was that this poem was actually written in Cambodia. But what it made me think about was the link that I had between where I used to live, which was in Hull, and my home place, which is Biddulphmore, in which the Trent rises. And the interesting connection there was that in Hull has the Humber estuary where the Trent pours into the sea. So when I went down to the North Ferriby foreshore, there was a direct link between myself and home. So I suppose being in Cambodia, what was I doing? I was thinking about home. But that was where I was reading Peter Redding's poem. So this poem, North Ferriby Foreshore, Remembering, is in memoriam of my granddad Charles, who would use this word Senetuct, and Peter Redding, whose writing I thought had a connection with Senetuct. And those two I've linked in memoriam, but they never met. North Ferriby Foreshore, Remembering. Not sand, but reaches of mud flat veined by rainbowy seawater seeps along the Humberside strand, and further out a pewter gleam where the Trent, water within water, fattens to estuary's broad blade, then wider still, circle swirls to mouth at silent horizons, the North Sea, Europe and beyond. Seems worlds away from Trent's wellhead and its insignificant sibilance trickling through Bailey's farmyard. How memories tumble to hills and home. The moorland village crick safe in England's vertebrae, where gritstone walling collects the field's purposes, and to grandad, simple man, crowned local bigwig, mouthing down his homegrown workmates. They'd Senetuct. Laugh at that bastardised Latin he hadn't even had chance to learn, let alone forget, any more than he'd heard of Ferriby or estuary, though knew belonging like the sons of his name. From The Sons of His Names, a poem about my son as a teenager, deep in lanes. It's about how I used to take our son to Leek College where I worked as he was following a course in computer studies. And our daily discourse was often minimal and reduced to just nods and monosyllables. The poem's called Deep in Lanes. Not quite AM, and the mid-May sun's already warming, the light refining to a honeyed haze that hurts the eyes. We're deep in lanes. I'm driving, the road suddenly thinner in the lush undergrowth, and everywhere's reduced to green and white. The nettles, jade pagodas, dandelions gone old, the swathing may blossom decking the hedge, the stitchwork knitting its intricate cover. I wonder, would my son understand if I suggested that Queen Anne's lace looks like cut-out antimacassars? We've exhausted early morning talks of college work, pocket money, fags, AIDS, his weekend job, careers, and I've succumbed to adolescent practice nonchalance, being found wanting in the monosyllabic code of a 17-year-old. So resort to radio. Today, the journey wallows in Rachmaninoff, Concerto 2, strangely out of place with the hazy day, the chording too intense, the notes too bold. From his kept breathing, I sense he's moved, so snatch a glance, recall I'm driving, and see he's sitting oh so stiff, his body spragged, against the music's swell, its boil and surge, its tug of heart, of groin. Just a cold, he proposes. I acknowledge with a nod. What point this fencing over words or names of flowers? Indeed, what point of speech in such congruence of need? And my final poem actually sort of celebrates both my mother and father, and I mentioned my father was handicapped by his illness, and my mother spent a lot of her energy and time looking after him. In between them, my loyalty sort of vied and moved. And this poem is about the way in which, in a way, my father was rather like a wall, my mother was like a hedge, and I'm somewhere in between, my boundaries being defined. So the poem is called Hedging Bets. While you can fall a wall down, watch it sag, rop and topple, a hedge, when accidentally flattened, will spring right back in time. So at best, you only ruffle it, and at worst, hack at its snagging limbs, till, renewed by savage pruning, up it comes again in certain resurrection. My dad was once a wall. Self-taught, self-built, self-made, he used this trinity to become a bulwark of society till time whittled away at him and betrayed what kept him held together. At first he crumbled, then he fell, block by block, to become a bundled lump they dumped thudding underground. We waited for the dust to settle and his gods to find new masonry. Since then, Mum's become more hedge-like. She's created out of personal space fresh definitions of territory. While much of her is surface that consolidates what's already known, who can guess what's taking place inside her limbs' conundrums, or the leaf of lights within her mind, her smiles, her eyes? And though she's often been lopped or suddenly cut down, her feet are firmly fixed, her roots flex strangleholds on place. She's learnt to live with setbacks till she can resume her shape, remaindered purpose buttressed by externalities. So far, torn between stone walling and hedging bets, I'm taking care before defining final boundaries. Be advised, don't fall on me. My footings haven't rooted yet.
There we are.